Welcome back to The Conservative. Hi there, I'm Mike Lannon, your host, and this is going to be one of those very fast half hours, as they all are. And you notice that I don't have my white shirt and tie and suit coat on today because I'm coming in from a different kind of a meeting that I've had most of the day, and this is an afternoon production, so you'll be seeing me at least once if you view the show only once, but if those that I know view it a couple of times, you'll be seeing this particular shirt for the next 2 weeks, and then I'll be back in and do another show. Well, today I want to speak just a few minutes on the political situation in Vermont, and then we'll move on to some of the crazy stuff that's happening beyond our borders. First thing I want to talk to everybody about is the understanding that we're moving further and further away from a two-system government in this state. And you have to stop, if you're looking at this show, and think whether or not this is an appropriate way in which to run a democracy. All Democrats running the state. There are very few Republicans in our House and very few Republicans in our Senate now in Montpelier that would allow us to have a appropriate debate so that we might be able to be more explicit, more transparent, and appropriately challenging with our words. When you have a one-system government, you basically have, even if it's not by one person, you do have a dictatorship. And a dictatorship can be one person in charge of the party going into the caucuses in the State House rooms or the Senate rooms and deciding that these would be the kinds of rules and regulations, policies and procedures that we will use to tax Vermonters, fine Vermonters, additionally licensing fee Vermonters to death. And if you've watched carefully, you've seen this going on now for the last 50 years, the slow process of the state of Vermont becoming very, very much a socialistic state in the sense that it is being totally run by the government. The government is deciding who works in this state. The government is deciding which companies will be allowed in this state. How do they do that? They do that by arranging for the kinds of employers and the kind of employees that will be available to those employers. They regulate, they produce rules, they create policies and procedures that squeeze the lifeblood out of the entrepreneur who might be considering opening up a business in the state of Vermont. So Act 250 is one of those acts that has tons of rules and regulations in it. Definitely is a legal policy and procedure by which you can establish a business, build a business, tear down a tree, whatever. In your city governments in the state of Vermont, you can't build without permits. Those are costly, getting to be more costly. You can't register a car or get a license without two separate licensing fees now. Each one a little bit more expensive than it was 5 years, 10 years, 15, and 20 years ago. You all know what's happening. You see the continual increase in the school budgets, the cost of education per pupil going up, and the number of pupils in our school systems going down. But on top of that, more and more of the educational burden of what a parent used to do, feed, clothe, shelter a child, is now being given to the teachers to do. So the teachers no longer just do reading, writing, and arithmetic. They now do a tremendous number of social, emotional learning. They do a tremendous number of teaching of what we would call habits of work that used to be taught in the home, and now the 21st century skills, which are a layer on top of the habits of work, which are allegedly going to prepare children to be young citizens so that they can find work. Well, where would this work be? It's not going to be currently found in the state of Vermont. We have 55,000 fewer children being educated in the state than we had 10 years ago, and we have a cost that's jumped from $13,000 per pupil to now close to $17,500 per pupil. That is because we have more rules, more regulations, more policies, and more procedures for the educational department to have to push down onto the local communities and force taxpayers to pay the money. And of course, you know, for years the taxpayer income for education has been taken away from the local communities and brought out into the state, and the state has no clue what your little boy or girl is learning or not learning in the school system. And at the bottom of all of that are the teachers who are being asked to fund the school with their own money. I wish people knew the amount of money that people in the school system that were teachers spend per classroom to make sure that Johnny is educated, because very few programs in the state of Vermont are fully funded by the taxpayer. That being said, the disrespect for teachers continues to grow, as it does for the police departments and for the fire departments. Anyone that has chosen a career of service, the community service in this country right now, including the state of Vermont, is disrespected because the left wishes to use rhetoric that basically is the use of Rule 5 by Zelensky's rules on how to destroy politically those who are opponents to the democratic process. Well, Nikita Khrushchev said in the 1960s that the only way to, early 60s, late 50s, I think, at the UN, when you've heard me talk about this before, when he took off his shoe and banged it on the table at the United Nations and said that the United States would fall to communism and that the process had already begun. And when they did back-checking what he was talking about, he was talking about the fact that we would, in this country, water down education. We would get it so floundered that the children would be leaving the country without the qualities necessary for understanding the problems of democracy and understanding citizenship and understanding the foundational values of the country and civics. And anybody that's over the age of 50 knows exactly what I'm talking about. And you find more and more young people leaving the college ranks with only one mindset, a socialistic mindset, understanding that capitalism is totally wrong and that we should venture down the road of socialism with no understanding of what socialism is all about. Well, the experiment in socialism here in Vermont is very quickly coming to an end. We probably have 10 to 20 years left before we're going to realize that this state is absolutely 100% totally broke, with no way of raising the income necessary to sustain a state budget as it is continually being formed. Now, we can kick the can down the road as far as we want, but those who are in the legislature right now are not going to be there in the far future, and that bill that has been created over the last 50 years is eventually going to have to be paid, and who's going to pay it? Well, it won't be people like myself, because I'm not going to be here for the next 40 years unless God's willing. That put me well over 100. Certainly possible, but that makes it very difficult to understand how people that are in this state that are 80 and above are going to be able to continue to sustain an increase in the cost for these rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. Who's going to pay for them? Most people that are 80 and above, which is a majority of people in Vermont now, fastest growing population, is not going to have the income necessary to sustain a $1,000 raise on their property taxes, for instance. Not going to be able to sustain a $1,000 or $2,000 rise in cost over the next 10 years for their health care cost. Not going to be able to sustain a devastating wipeout of their entire life savings, the savings that are necessary to allow them to live past 100, which, by the way, is also a large population of centurions of Vermont. But if you're going to live a quality of life and you've got some health issues, it's going to cost you some money, even if you have insurance, in order to stay well and healthy. So there is no easy answer to any of these things, but one of those answers is to get away from the one-party system, the socialistic party system that we are now in, and allow for the clean, fair, honest debate between the right and the left. We've allowed this state to become a total one-state system, one-party state. And those of you that are sitting out there watching the show that have always voted Democrat, stop for a minute and think about whether or not that's a good thing to be doing. And watch even in where this show is produced and broadcast from Rutland. Rutland has 4 wards. 2 wards have folks continually voting to reduce your taxes, and 2 wards, Ward 3 and Ward 4, that have 2 folks that continually vote to increase taxes, licensing fees, and fines through additional rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. Now, if they were sitting in the room right now, they'd have a big argument because they would deny that they're ever doing that. But all you have to do is go to the state and look at their voting record and what they're voting for and what they are standing on the floor and speaking about. That increases your tax dollar, increases your licensing fee, or the fine for failure to comply with a rule, regulation, policy, or procedure. Notice I don't say it's always just a law, because a lot of these things fall under different categories and have licensing fees associated with the rule, the regulation, the policy, or the procedure. They have fines associated with those 4 items, and you, if you're in violation of them, you pay many dollars. Now, licensing certainly isn't as costly as, let's say, a fine, but one way or the other, to fight that fine or to fight that license for a discount or for no fine or no licensing fee is going to be almost as costly as actually paying for it. So we certainly have a situation in this state where we have allowed one-party rule to begin the crunch of free thought. And so you watch carefully as the state is slowly but surely taking over the moral value, the teaching of the moral value. Where is it being taught? Well, it's not being taught in the churches, and it's not being taught in the schools as much as you might think. It's basically, and it's not certainly being taught in the home. Most of these value structures are coming down through rules, regulations, policies, and procedures produced by the state. And so years ago, when society was founded on the Judeo-Christian principles, there were basically 10 commandments. Now, these 10 commandments have basically been put to the side, and you now have probably 500-600 rules that mean the same thing as 10, but 500 or 600 rules for each time you sneeze or don't sneeze, or each time you walk to the right instead of to the left, you're going to be fined. And if you're not fined, or you're not licensed with a fee, then one of the 13 rules that Mr. Selinsky said that we should be using to tear down the opposition party would be put into play, and you would be one way or the other politically destroyed or personally destroyed, your character destroyed, one way or the other, to stop you from exercising free speech. And that becomes a huge problem, because we've now just touched on 2 tenets of the Vermont Constitution's First Amendment, and certainly the constitutional First Amendment of the United States Constitution, the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech. Now, that next freedom, the freedom of the press in the state of Vermont. Most newspapers in this state now are far left and running out of money and running out of readership. I've often said, and will say till my dying breath, that if a newspaper wants to be really relevant in this country today, including the state of Vermont, it has to be able to present both views, because there's more people in the state of Vermont, even though they may be voting the Democratic Party, are more moderate than far left, and they're more in the middle. And then you have the conservatives. So you have the middle and you have the conservatives. You don't have an extreme right in the state of Vermont. You don't have an extreme left in the state of Vermont other than Bernie Sanders. You have basically most of the people that are in the middle. Now, our extreme left is mostly in Burlington, near the colleges. And that presents a problem because, quite frankly, I'm afraid that these folks coming out of the colleges with the professors that are teaching them today have no knowledge, no understanding, and no wisdom of what it's like to have free and open debate and discuss the issues and come to some form of conclusion, outcome that is good for everybody. They're told by the professors, and you guys can go and look these things up and see what's happening. They're told by the professors that the majority of the Americans are deplorable, they're stupid. I was interested the other day to see that the winner of the most valuable player, the best kicker for the women's national soccer team, was out there again decrying the fact that her mom and dad watched Fox News. Well, I don't think that anybody should totally just watch Fox News. You've heard me say that before. But I find it very interesting to see that Fox News consistently from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 11 o'clock at night has close to 2 million more viewers than the next closest station. And the next closest station could be anybody from time to time, depending upon the hour of the evening. Okay, so the weakest station during that time slot consistently over the last 2 years has been CNN. They consistently are at the bottom of the pit. Well, chances are very good that people understand, because we're not as stupid as the people on the left would want us to believe. Americans do understand when they're being told rotten false news. They know the difference between an editorial and an opinion piece and actual facts. So every time that most Americans hear a newscaster on any of the stations talking about the news and presenting the fact, and then throw in an opinion, they know that that news is then therefore automatically slanted one way or the other. So good reporting, good press is fact finding and presents the facts as they are found, and allow the Americans who are listening or reading that news to make a discernment for themselves. Now, sometimes people get really upset because Fox News has in the evening opinion shows. They have this guy named Carlson, I think his name is, and they've got this Hannity guy, and they've got this Ingalls woman. So they've got 3 hours of political opinion, and that makes a big difference. You know, when you're watching the show that is driven by the host, one of the three that I just mentioned, and they'll tell you it's opinion. So if you're looking at Fox News from 8 o'clock at night till 8 to 11, those three shows, then you know that you are looking at an opinion news show. Not news, opinion. And so you have to make sure that you make that discernment. Now, you may agree with the opinion. That's up to you to do that. And I would say a lot of people agree with the opinion of those three folks, because those are the three shows that I just talked about that have the 3 million people, 2 to 3 million people consistently over each broadcast night, above and beyond all the other cable news networks. Now, in the evening news, it appears that CBS is the most consistently watched. I don't know how high their rating is, but it is most consistently watched over any other station. Now, I suspect that for some of that, there could still be a Walter Cronkite carryover, although he has now been dead close to 50 years. So I'm not sure that that statement would be anything more than an opinion. I think that people would need to be able to fact check that and see why that particular TV station continues to hold a stronger, albeit slight lead over the next stations. And I'm not sure who second and third is, but it's either ABC or NBC for the regular evening network news. But even the network news, CBS, ABC, or NBC, don't hold a candle to the news that's being presented on Fox at 5 and 6 o'clock, or the news that's being presented, I think it's at 4 o'clock, that's being presented by the liberal Shepard Smith on Fox News. And that's the other thing. See how I went back and I said newspapers that present both sides, that have both kinds of reporters working for them, are going to be more successful than one side or the other side. Most people know that when Shepard Smith is delivering the news, and even though he throws in opinion from time to time, which he shouldn't do, and has gotten into trouble for it, when he presents the 4 o'clock Fox News, I think it's at 4, he's a liberal. And there's no bones about it. He is a liberal. And he professes to be a liberal. He has much more of a democratic view of things, a left view of things, and there's no question about it. So that's one of the reasons that Fox News is as good as it is, because they have all kinds on there. From strong conservative points of view, which I would say would be Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity probably have the strongest conservative views, but there are others that are on that station that are strong conservative views. And rather than look at those opinions and discern good and bad information from them, and then look at the other side of the coin and get good information discernment from them and come to your own opinion, people want to hear the fact that, oh, the left hates Fox News, or as the young lady from the winning women's soccer team, Rapinoe, I think her last name was, I can't remember, no, it begins with an R, but she's got purple hair and was a pretty good soccer player, I guess. But her short claim to fame the other day was to say that she can't believe that her mom and dad look at Fox News. I can't believe that a daughter would put their own parent under the bus. But that kind of tells you sometimes how he used those 13 rules that Sal Alinsky has taught so many young people, and people are picking these rules up and don't even know where they came from. And they're using these rules, and they've been taught to use these rules, and they throw their own parent under the bus. I'd be rather shocked if a kid that I knew would they do that to their parent. Afraid we'd be on no speaking terms pretty quick. And maybe that's the way it is with that young lady and her parents. I don't know. Not my job to find out those kind of minuscule things. But you basically know what I'm talking about when I say be discerning. Take a very quick look at what the intention is that the folk that are talking, what is their intention? Pay attention to that intention. What is it? And are they trying to build shared meaning, or are they trying to slap their meaning on you and force you to become them without any kind of discernment? In that conversation, do they balance any kind of their opinion with their advocacy position, okay, with any form of inquiry? Are they asking good questions, or are they softball questions that do not get to the heart of good news? Okay, if they're not doing that, then they're failing you miserably, and you have to be careful about that, because if you're saying to the newscaster while you're watching the news, including my show, why isn't he saying this? Why isn't he asking that question? Then you know we need to stop and think, maybe get to that newscaster and say, you know, you're not presenting news that I'm going to watch and heed. or listen to for facts. I'm going to be clicking by. So those are very important. And of course, you have to have some empathy. You have to be able to use your own self-awareness as a resource. You've got to sit and think about who you are when you're listening to these newscasts and whether or not it fits into your depth of knowledge, your DOK. Do you have the depth of knowledge necessary to add more information, or can you cast it out as knowing that it's propaganda and or not factual? And finally, and I've said these 5 principles that I've just mentioned before, and the 5th one being, can you sit and literally explore any form of an impasse? Well, at the government level in the state of Vermont, there's no explanation of impasses right now. There's no exploration at all. Is there any at the city level? I think there is some. Is there any at the national level? Absolutely not. I've never seen in my lifetime such rancor. There was pretty strong rancor in the Obama administration between the left and the right. It's worse now than ever before. They want to blame it all on Donald Trump. Now, there's enough blame to go around to all the leadership in Washington. You've got Schumer and McConnell, you've got Nancy Pelosi, you've got Trump, you've got them all sitting down there yelling and screaming at each other, blaming each other for doing all kinds of bad things for America. And I think it pretty egregious when you've got the press on the left in lockstep unison trying to figure out a good way to have a major recession in this country so that the current president fails miserably at the polls and is not elected. Well, it hasn't been true that every single president has not been elected when there was a recession. There's been 3 presidents that have been elected during recessions. So Trump is smart enough, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, that think that a recession would bring him down. Russiagate didn't bring him down. The other craziness that's been thrown at him didn't bring him down. And he's going to be strong enough to say that the government has failed us miserably, not him. And I think he's got such a strong 4-year record by the time November comes here that he's going to be able to say that if the economy begins to falter and slide into a recession, which is certainly possible because it is cyclical. You do have ups and downs in economies, always have had in this country, but I think he's going to be strong enough to say this is totally on Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's plate. And I think a lot of people are going to believe that and take it to heart and blame those guys versus who the Democrats think right now would get blamed, which would be the President of the United States. He's just shrewd enough and Twitter account enough. When you got 65 million participants on Twitter account, they're not sitting there just to not hear. So let's say that 65 million people have their own waiting list of 100. That's 650 million. That's almost every single American in the country is going to hear from Donald Trump one way or the other come November. So take my words for what they are. It's my opinion. By the way, as I've said before, this is an opinion show, and I think that Trump is going to be very difficult to beat unless something really comes down the line that unravels his current presidency. An incumbent is very difficult to beat. And Trump has the economy. He has the immigration issue, which, by the way, again, polls show is the #1 issue in America. Immigration, taking care of our borders, making sure that our cities don't continue to pay what the left wants us to pay for illegals. Vermont has the same problem. We have illegals crossing our northern border out of Canada. We're doing absolutely nothing about it. And you, my friends, who are watching this show, haven't heard a thing about it. And it'd be interesting to see how many of you can go and find out how many people per month are walking across our border into this state. It's not just 2 or 3. And because the press doesn't report it, you would be shocked to find out how many people are walking across the Vermont border out of Canada into this country. Well, Showtime is at an end. I told you it was a fast half hour. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, 2 weeks from now. Bye now.